and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And did you hear that sweet person that just said that this is a live show and welcome and all that stuff? That's my friend Phyllis down in New York, and she's lying. It's not live. It's a pre-recorded show, and that's because I am overseas, and I can't do the show live where I am, basically. So this is a pre-recorded show, but you're going to like tonight's show, and I will tell you why. First, we start out with Dr. Erol Faruk, and he has a book out called The Compelling Scientific Evidence for UFOs. And a lot of this has to do with his soil analysis of the Delphos, Kansas UFO landing report. And what he was trying to do, he was trying to publish this paper, and he got frustrated. And so he decided to instead make it into a book, trying to get the word out there that scientific evidence of a UFO landing does exist. And a very interesting conversation. In the second hour, we have Clas Svahn, and he's been on before once. He's one of my very favorite guests, and he is the international director for UFO-Sweden, which is a nonprofit founded in 1970. Now, in Sweden, they take this topic seriously, and there's great scientific approaches to the subject. So that's what you're going to hear in hour 2. So until I get a new support platform completely straightened out, the shows are free. I do appreciate each and every supporter, and hopefully I'll be able to have something active and up by the time I am back on the 30th with the next show. We're going to get started with hour 1 with Erol Faruk. And thanks again for listening and your support. One more thing, Michael Lauk, our former co-host, will be handling a show next week, and I will be back on the 30th. Hold tight. We'll be right back with Dr. Erol Faruk. So I hope you enjoy the show. It's pre-recorded, and this is a very fascinating guest, Dr. Erol Faruk, and his book that he has out now, and I hope you do read it. I read it and really enjoyed it, or I should say I really got a lot out of it, and we'll talk more about that later. The book name is The Compelling Science Evidence for UFOs, the Analysis of the Delphos, Kansas UFO Landing Report. And welcome to the show, Errol.
Hi, Martin. Hi.
We had quite a time getting together, didn't we? We were actually thinking it could be the Men in Black in this, and then as I tried to connect with you today, the power went out in the entire house.
Very, very odd happenings.
It has been, and it's been ongoing. And finally, we got it together, and here we are. So, where do you live now?
I live in a suburb of London, northeast.
Uh-huh.
It's fairly. I can get into the centre of London very, very quickly by train, but I can also go out into the country very quickly as well. So it's a nice part of London, which it means that I can commute wherever I want to go to.
We kind of call it the suburbs, sort of the suburbs out here. I'm not sure if that's what it's called there or not, but
suburbs. Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And your fascination with UFOs, I want to talk about that. But also, I just want to say to the listener, it's very hard to get people in the UK in general on the show because of the hour difference. The show goes live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. And so that's in the middle of the night. That's like 2 in the morning, I believe, or something like that for anyone over there. So most shows I'm going to try to do pre-recorded are the European shows. So anyway, could you tell the listening audience how you became fascinated with UFOs to begin with? And you have a science background. I want to talk about all that, too.
Yeah. Well, I've been interested in science from a very early age. My first interest was into microscopy. I was interested. I got myself my mother got me a small toy microscope so that I could look at things like insects and see them magnified, which really impressed me. And then, the fact that I was using optical equipment eventually led me to look at the skies with a telescope. And I made myself a small refracting telescope using the method described by Patrick Moore, who's one of the people that I read, whose books I read when I was young. And that got me into astronomy. So I was looking at the moon and planets and whatever. And then while I was rummaging through books on astronomy at the local library, I fortuitously came across a book on UFOs. And the book, part of it gave a good description of the way a lot of people from across the world were reporting very similar objects. And that fascinated me. I couldn't figure out, and of course these objects were not what you would call normal. I mean, these were flying objects with characteristics which were way ahead of what we appear to have as a technology. So that got me into it, and I was just fascinated. I couldn't figure out why it was that so many people were seeing the same sort of things from across the world. And I eventually subscribed to a magazine called the Flying Saucer Review, which took me into new avenues such as abductions and whatnot. And it was by reading one of the sister magazines of the Flying Saucer Review, which was called Claes Histories, I got into knowing about the Delphos case. This was a write-up by Ted Phillips in Clas Histories, and that really piqued my interest, because here there was a case where there was it left a ring in the ground, a glowing ring. The ring itself had become strongly hydrophobic. In other words, it wouldn't allow water to be absorbed. So that's basically how I got into UFOs, and it's been a fascination for me since basically childhood, since I got into astronomy. In reality.
Now, I remember reading in your book where you actually met an astronomer that you respected, and you posed the question about UFOs to him. Do you want to talk about that? Yes. Well, I asked Patrick Moore, who was my idol when I was a child, because he wrote so many books that introduced astronomy in a very easy, readable manner for children. And of course, when I say children, I'm now talking about early teens, and
once I got really interested into astronomy, I became a paid-up junior member of the British Astronomical Association. It wasn't. I didn't do it very long, maybe a year or two. But nevertheless, once I became a member, then I could go and take part in their meetings. And in one of those meetings, I actually met Patrick Moore. Now, I can't remember what I actually asked him about. And I'm pretty sure I didn't broach the subject of UFOs. But it was after I came back that I actually wrote to him. And he kindly replied with a postcard explaining that he didn't think, basically referring to UFOs as a kind of a subject which couldn't be taken very seriously. Actually, I think he actually compared it to the Flat Earth Society, the belief in the Flat Earth Society, which really shocked me. I mean, it was. I have heard him talk about UFOs since receiving his postcard, and he's never really shied away from that kind of incredulous thought about UFOs. So it's one of those things. And a lot of scientists, of course, he could be classified as a scientist. A lot of scientists do have this opinion, but my own feeling is that it comes from a base knowledge of pretty zero information, and so it's like, following the Joneses. Because other scientists think it's nonsense, they latch onto it and just keep thinking it's nonsense. Whereas, of course, if you delve into the subject, you discover that it is not. It isn't nonsense at all.
I was watching.
So,
go ahead.
No, carry on. That's fine.
Yeah, I was watching a video recently. Let's see. It's UFOs, friend, foe, or fantasy. And it was a CBS special with Walter Cronkite done back in 1966. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I don't think I've seen that.
It's on YouTube. It's actually really worth watching, just to show the amount of ridicule that happens when it comes to UFOs all the way through this. There's one scene that I've actually seen before where a guy is reporting a UFO in one scene, and then later on they come back and talk to him, and he said, "Look at my windshield. It's smashed from bottles, from people throwing bottles at my car going by." And he says, "I would never report this again." And
Yeah, well, exactly.
So,
and I actually do refer to that situation in my book.
Yes.
The situation that a lot of people, especially in the 60s and 70s, they did the noble thing of reporting these sightings, and then they got hit so hard by ridicule that they would come out and say, "Well, I've never mentioned this again." I think it's a ludicrous situation when you think about it, but that's the way it is, unfortunately, and it's tending that way even as we speak.
It is. Now, a lot of people say this all stems from the Robertson panel, which met, I think it was January 1953. And I believe some of it, yes, from that. But, I've read through a lot of the Robertson panel. There's nothing that really indicates 100%, to ridicule everybody that brings up UFOs. It was just they were trying to curb the amount of reports, basically.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of people...
Right. But the fact that it was negative to UFO reports, obviously, then scientists were given, carte blanche, the tendency to just ignore the subject ever since. And of course, the Condon report was written and the report also came out negative, basically on Condon's negative opinion from the start. So it just feeds on itself. It just really feeds on itself. It never really come out of this bad situation regarding interest by scientists on UFOs generally.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Condon report is one that scientists will refer to as the reason why they are not interested, because it was it was proven.
There's about 30% which can't be explained.
Right.
In that report. So, on what basis can they say that? It's basically they've just listened to Condon himself. Condon admitted early on, even before the report was published, that he thought the subject was nonsense. And once he made his thoughts clear, everyone else latched onto it. So, if you look into the Condon report in a way it should be looked upon, you'll come to the conclusion that about 30% of the sightings in the report can't actually be explained. So, on what basis can it be seen as negative? It can't be. It's just based solely on Condon's negative opinion from his own high standing in that report.
Now, I also understand that a few people were, so to speak, let go from that board when they would oppose what his views were. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems to me that I had a guest a while back that had really looked into that whole thing and had, that was his.
Yeah, I think you're correct. There were some people that had let him go because they didn't consider that the report was entirely negative, and so obviously that didn't go down well with Condon himself.
Okay, well, before we talk about the Delphos itself, let's talk a little bit about a trace evidence from landings. There have been, I've heard in your book you cite exactly, I believe, a number. Do I want to say 4,000 or so cases?
I believe it's 4,000 to 5,000, and obviously Ted Phillips has kept the score on that regard. As far as I understand, it's about 5,000 trace cases, but pretty widely dispersed, and some of them are historical. How much credence you can give to a portion of them, I don't know, but that's basically is saying that all told, there's about 5,000 cases have accrued since quite a long time ago.
Right, and this part of the whole situation is something that actually can be scientifically explored in many cases, and that was your reasoning for going ahead and concentrating on the soil analysis of this one. But
yes.
How about others? Do you know if there's available evidence for any of those 5,000 that were there?
Well, my understanding is that quite a number of them have left traces like depressions on the soil, or partial radioactivity, apparent radioactivity, but either they've never been fully analyzed subsequently, or the data hasn't been very good. So obviously there's no proof from any of them, which is why I was so keen to study the Delphos case. Because having read that originally in the case histories, I thought there was a lot of potential meat there,
right.
A lot of information that could be accessed, because there was clearly a lot of had a major impact on the soil chemistry. From the description of the fact that the soil had become hydrophobic, and it was initially glowing and all this kind of thing, it was clear that there was something quite special had happened at Delphos. And that's why, because of course my background, by the time I got around to analyzing that, was as an organic chemist, it seemed to me that it was just the sort of thing I could potentially do.
And how are you, well, first of all, before we get into how you were able to get the samples and all that, let's, for the listener out there that's not familiar with that case, why don't you go over that case in detail, if you would? Well,
I'm pretty sure the Delphos case is well known now. There are websites which describe the case in quite a lot of detail. In essence, the family the Johnson family living in a farm. The son of the Johnsons, Ronald, was tending some sheep in the farm area, and he was in a shed. He heard a rumbling noise. He stepped out of the shed and he saw about 75 feet away from him a glowing mushroom-shaped object sitting over a bit of ground. It was basically hovering over that ground. Now, while he was watching this object, and there was a rumbling noise, and he heard that. That's why he came out to see it, and he thought the rumbling noise sounded like a washing machine that might not be turning around in a fluent manner. And he also saw, while the object was glowing itself, he also saw a glow underneath the object, between the object and the ground. And after a few minutes, the object departed. He became temporarily blinded because of the intense glow. He then, once his sight returned, he rushed up to the farm to tell his parents about what he'd seen. They didn't believe him at first. He became agitated. They then came out of the farm, looked up and saw this object, this brilliantly lit object, which was described as being the color of an arc welder, which I think arc welders generally are blue color, bluish white, receding into the distance. And they could also see at the same time the moon, so it wasn't as if they were mistaking the moon for the object. And then they then went over to where the object had hovered originally, and saw on the ground a glowing ring. It was a very bright glowing ring. The adult Johnsons said that it was bright enough to read a newspaper by, because it's fairly dark. It's about 7 p.m. in November of 1971, I believe. And then they touched the soil. It felt moist. They immediately experienced a numbing effect, such as a local anesthetic would perhaps provide. And to cut a long story short, they obviously called the sheriff, the local sheriff, the next day. The Johnson, Ronald Johnson's mother, went back, and because she was so impressed with the glowing ring, she brought back a camera and took a photograph of the glowing ring, and that we have the image on presented on the front of my book of that glowing ring. And then subsequently they reported the incident to the sheriff. The sheriff came the following day in the morning and took a photograph of the ring that was left. It was basically an 8-foot diameter ring with a white surface. Obviously quite distant from the greyish earth either side of the ring itself. And that's basically what it was. And then, of course, Ted Phillips eventually got called in. He came up to the area about a month later, took samples of the soil, wrote the report, which I then subsequently read and was intrigued by. And then I was hoping that some information could come out eventually, but nothing seemed to. And then eventually I was doing postdoctoral research at Nottingham University, and it was then that I contacted UFOs in Chicago, Mark Rodegia, through an intermediary, to try and get hold of this soil. And that's when I received the soil. And I received it at Nottingham University, and as soon as I received it, I did a couple of tests, discovered that there was something impregnating the soil. I spoke to my academic supervisor. He was intrigued. He then passed me over to another academic at the university, someone who was the chemiluminescence expert, described to him the story, showed him the pictures. He was pretty much flabbergasted at what he read, and he was the one who actually helped me obtain the fluorescent spectra that are reported in my book.
Now,
but that's pretty much it.
Now, I think they had a lot of courage to go touch it. First of all, I would have never done that. But did they have any long-lasting effects after the numbness went away?
Well, I think the long-lasting effect was, in fact, the numbing. The numbing. I mean, you'd have to check with Ted Phillips, but I'm pretty sure some of the numbing didn't actually go away. Some of the fingertips, or maybe part of the leg, one they touched with their fingertips, the affected fingertips, they then touched their leg, and some of the leg was affected as well. Portions of their skin apparently were left desensitized. In other words, they couldn't feel anything. And that lasted potentially for months, maybe even longer.
Wow. And what would explain something like that? There could be several things, but what, in your research, did you find anything that actually explained why that happened?
The soil, the ring soil was impregnated with a compound which has dual hydrophobic and hydrophilic character. Part of the molecule is very hydrophobic. In other words, it repels water. And part of the molecule, the other part of the molecule, is very hydrophilic. It loves water. And that is, in fact, the reason why the soil became hydrophobic. Basically, the material itself must have been deposited as an aqueous solution because the compound in the soil is highly water-soluble, very highly water-soluble. It behaves almost like a soap because of the dual hydrophilic nature of the compound. I actually determined the compound to be in the form of an alkali metal salt of an organic acid, organic carboxylic acid. And based on that, I could do things to the compound. I could actually treat it with something like silver nitrate, which would precipitate out the silver salt of the carboxylate, and then treat the silver salt with a compound called methyl iodide to generate the corresponding methyl ester of the compound. So I did quite a lot of stuff with this compound, but the fact is it's the dual hydrophobic, hydrophilic nature of the compound which is characteristic of anesthetic compounds. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that that's the reason why this compound had that effect on the people themselves. And remember, they also felt that the ring was moist, and that would concur with the fact that this stuff had been deposited as an aqueous solution. So they went over, saw the glowing ring, touched it. They felt it was moist, and because it was moist, that would enable intimate link with the skin material to enable anesthesia to work. Now, I did actually do some research on this. I found that anesthetics on skin take a long time to penetrate. But that's general anesthesia. That's run-of-the-mill anesthetics, which would be amines of tertiary amines and the like. This particular compound in the soil had funny qualities because of the fact it was also an alkali metal salt to an organic acid. So I couldn't pin down what was causing the anesthesia, but in general terms, the fact that it was consisted of a hydrophobic moiety connected to a hydrophilic one would be the reason why this material had given the anesthetic left anesthetic sensation on the fingertips.
If you're listening live and just came aboard, this is a pre-recorded show with Dr. Erol Faruk, and He's talking about the compelling scientific evidence of UFOs. His book, The Analysis of the Delphos, Kansas UFO Landing Report. And so what would a craft have to be doing to emit this type of substance in what you found? Go ahead.
If you look at I basically summed it up on the front page of my book. What it appears is, remember that this object itself was glowing brightly. That was recorded by Ronald initially, and it was so bright that he actually hurt his eyes to look at it. Then it departed, and he called his parents out, and then both the parents and himself, watched this thing receding into the distance, flying toward the south, receding into the distance, still with this very bright glow, which they describe as the color of an arc welder. Now, that fact it was colored, it had the color of an arc welder implies that it was a bluish-white color, because that's when you look at arc welders in a garage, for example, that's the kind of light being emitted generally. Now, Ronald also saw, while this object was hovering and emitting light about its surface, he also saw a glow between the object and the ground. And he described it as something that was shimmering, was coming off from the object. And then, eventually, the object departed, and then the whole family came to the area, and they discovered a glowing ring on the ground. So there's three things which are glowing here. You've got the glow of the object itself, you've got the glow between the object and the ground, and then you've got the glow on the ring itself. And the glow in the ring, as I said, was described as bright enough to read a newspaper by. Now, there is a reason for that link, because my analysis indicates that whatever's in that soil was giving rise to the illumination of the UFO itself. And you can see in the front of my book, at the bottom, what I believe gave rise to the ring. You basically got to have the UFO having an envelope of chemiluminescent material. It's there pretty much solely for giving off light. I couldn't imagine what else it would be used for. And in order for that to work, you'd have to have some way. It would work through using an oxidant, and the obvious oxidant would be aerial oxygen. And you'd have to have the UFO having a transparent surface, both transparent and permeable to oxygen, in order for the oxygen to enter, and then for the UFO to give off light. Now, when Ronald saw it originally, he said he saw blue, red, and orange glows about the object. Now, the blue is obviously the true emission, but the color of the solution of this material is actually red. So you could work out that what Ronald saw was this UFO emitting light, but only partially through its surface. Some parts were not emitting light, and some parts were. The parts that were absorbing oxygen would give off the blue light. The parts of the object that were not absorbing oxygen would retain the original red color of the solution. So this is why Ronald described the object as blue, having blue, red, and orange glows about its surface. It would have been quite an impressive sight to see this. And as I say, the material was dumped into the ground, soaked up by the soil. The soil then became hydrophobic because the soil, which has hydrophilic groups, water-loving groups, would adhere with the water-loving groups of the compound, leaving the surface of the soil exposed with the hydrophobicity, the hydrophobic area of the compound. So when you put water on the soil, which has got this impregnation in it, it would actually not absorb any water. That was the reason why it became hydrophobic. You actually had to take the soil and forcibly mix it with water in order for the impregnated compound to be leached out into the solution, and then you could work with it in a lab, which is what I did, and subsequently what Phyllis Budinger did in the U.S. as well.
Okay, so I do want to talk about that report that it was a woman scientist, right? That did this first report.
Well, she's an analyst.
An analyst. Okay.
She's an analyst rather than a hands-on chemist, as it were. I mean, my background was actually manipulating chemicals to actually make other things. I'm basically a long-term pharmaceutical chemist, where I worked on processes, developing processes to manufacture pharmaceutically active compounds. Whereas Phyllis was solely an analyst. She would basically take material and just put it through machines, various machines, to try and get data from the compound. So that's what she did, but she wasn't able to take it in as deep a manner as I did, because I was able to manipulate the compound in order to make that analysis easier.
I should have asked you earlier to just tell the listening audience why you are qualified, what your educational background is, if you would.
Okay. Well, I took my first degree at Queen Mary College, London University, and stayed on to take a PhD. This was in organic synthesis. I was working on something called carotenoids, which are plant pigments. Tomatoes, the red color of tomatoes, for example, the red color of salmon. These are red because of certain chemical components, constituents, which are called carotenoids. And that's where I did the bulk of my PhD. I then went to do other research at Oxford and Nottingham universities before I eventually became a development chemist working for a major pharmaceutical company. And I did that. I did that for 26 years. Now, it was while I was at Nottingham University that I actually received the soil material, and I was able to work with the soil material in the chemistry lab at Nottingham University.
Okay, and just also, can you go over the what you found, the analysis of this soil in general? Well,
it basically the compound itself is carbon-based. It's basically carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. I didn't find any sulfur there. I've got an empirical formula which is for the compound, but nothing. I couldn't gain anything in terms of its structure. A lot more work would have to have been done to find out about the chemical structure of the compound. And, of course, the difficulty was that this substance, this compound, was also very unstable in air. In fact, it needed, that was part of the fact that it's on exposure to air, the pure compound will almost certainly have emitted light. But I never saw the pure compound because I received, the material was actually obtained from by Ted Phillips a month after the alleged event, and then I received it a few years after that. Now, he had kept the soil material in a fridge in the dark, so I know that the material itself, although there was some decomposition, there wasn't a great deal of decomposition, but the fact was that once you try to isolate the compound, which I attempted to do, you could see that for the purified compound, using a technique called thin layer chromatography, as soon as it saw oxygen, it would start to oxidize, and you knew that because it would start to lose color, and it also generates a highly fluorescent product when you watched it under a UV lamp. And that generation of the fluorescent compound is actually part and parcel of why this material would have emitted light, because it's when you get a chemiluminescent oxidation, which is what I was suggesting in my book, you're actually using oxygen to break down a compound and generate a byproduct, which would be highly fluorescent, and that process would actually lead to fluorescence as seen by the people concerned.
Now, if this ring sat there for a month, wouldn't a lot of the material have oxidized already?
Well, it wouldn't have, because a lot of the material was under the ground.
I see.
The material was soaked up. It was dumped into the ground. I would suspect as a spray, which would explain why the ring is elongated toward the wind direction. Once it hit the ground, of course, there's more spray coming behind it. So as soon as it was hitting the ground, it was actually being pushed into the ground, underneath the surface of the soil. Now, the material and the hydrophobicity, in other words, the impregnation of the soil with this compound, extended to about 14 inches below the soil surface.
Oh, wow.
So underneath, when you go down that far, you can be pretty damn sure there's no oxygen around. So it's the material that was subsurface, taken out from under the ground, that was the most important. Whereas the material pretty close to the ground, close to the ground surface, that would already have been oxidized. In fact, that was the reason why the soil was growing in the dark, because that was the oxidation that the people were seeing. So it was dumped into the ground. Some of it was put underneath the ground because of the material coming subsequently. And then once the object departed, the pool that was left on top of the surface was oxidizing, reacting with the oxygen, and giving rise to the fluorescent light, which is what the people said they saw. So the white color of the ring is actually almost certainly the fully oxidized compound. And that would have been, in fact, if I had had any of that, that would have been something that I would have been keen to have looked at. But the material I got, I didn't see any of the white material. I think all of it, pretty much all of it, or most of it, was soil, which was impregnated, but it wasn't actually the white material on top of the surface that I received. I didn't get any of that.
Now, did you also get a?
Carry on.
Did you also get a sample of test soil from outside of the ring?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you had to have that. I mean, the control soil was there. I was doing most of my studies with using the control soil as the rule, as it were, the ruler. So, I mean, it's all in my book. All the analysis data referring to what the control soil had, what various other soil material from the ring itself contained, and they can all the data is in there in the back of the book, which is the appendix, which is the proper analytical report that I actually try to get published in a scientific journal, but no one would touch it.
I want to talk about that because that's to me is a very important part of your book, and a frustrating one as well. But before we get into that, has anyone kept a long-term eye on that ring? What's going on with it, or what has gone on with it?
As far as I know, Ted Phillips has taken photographs over several years, and obviously one of the things that the things that was pointed out was the ring soil wouldn't actually allow growth. If you read the growth of plants, if you read the actual original report by Ted Phillips, he actually points out that the ring soil wouldn't allow any growth, and obviously it's impregnated with this compound, so it's likely to have inhibited any plant growth in that in the ring.
Wow.
And again, you can see photographs of the ring. I think there's a photograph of the ring taken several months after the landing, perhaps maybe a couple of years after the landing. I'm not sure. I can't remember now, but certainly worth chasing up. But I think Ted Phillips would be the person to ask about subsequent analyses and whatever about the ring. But I did the initial research. Then, of course, Phyllis Budinger came into it. She also analysed it, largely corroborating the evidence that I had produced. However, she didn't go to the extent of trying to isolate the compound in the way that I did, using silver nitrate and then subsequently methyl iodide, because that wasn't something that she was had practiced to do, because she wasn't she was just an analyst, and she wouldn't have known how to do that.
Okay. Has anyone ever reported anything similar to this, as far as a glowing ring or anything like that?
I don't think so. There may be a couple of very old reports. I think I remember seeing a couple of analogous reports in the original report by Ted Phillips, but I don't think they were followed up. So I don't think anybody actually went over there and tried to analyze it.
I see. Now, there was, I know you, in your book, you mentioned a lot of other very interesting cases, some that I've had guests on speak about before, but all very interesting cases. And now this kind of leads me into talking about why science snubs their nose at reports like this. And I want you to tell the audience what you went through. And, boy, you went through a lot of grief trying to get this published in a mainstream science report. And, first of all, it was published in a very obscure UFO paper. Is that right?
Yes, in the Journal of UFO Studies. It was published in, I think, 1985, I think it was. My original report. But, you know, that was a journal that didn't have a large readership, and it was largely forgotten, which was why I then tried to get... I couldn't understand why more scientists were not getting interested in this, and that's why I thought I really must try and publish this work as a proper scientific paper, and try and get it published so that other scientists can actually see what's going on out there in terms of UFO, in terms of the UFO phenomenon. So before I wrote my book, I actually tried to get my paper. It was a revamped paper, updated version of my paper. Tried to publish it through initially Nature, then the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, and a couple of others, Astrobiology, International Journal of Astrobiology, and they wouldn't touch it. They were just frightened of it. Basically, they didn't want to, because this subject has a huge credibility problem with scientists in general. They're loath to do anything about it, unfortunately. Nobody wants to be the first to to get this out there.
Yeah.
So I had to write my book. Basically. That was the only way I could do it. And the reason I've got it there, I've got pretty much an explanation of what's going on on the front page of my book, is basically to entice scientists. You know, all they need to do is look at that front page and wonder, you know, what is called. There's obviously a ring there. There's a ring which has been photographed, a glowing ring which has been photographed and described as such, and then there's the ring taken the following day by the sheriff. Something must have caused those effects. Mm-hmm. Now, what Ronald saw is shown at the very top of my book, top of the front page of my book. And after the analysis, what I think is happening is shown at the bottom of the page. And the two actually tie up very, very neatly. And of course, it explains what it is, why it is, and the effects noted by the witnesses. So really, the front page of my book, I have tried to use as an enticing tool. And I've since sent links to my book to various scientists just to see what they say, you know. And I've had a couple of responses. They said it's very interesting, but they know that UFOs don't exist, so whatever I've discovered can't be true, basically. That's basically, it's putting the cart before the horse to a lot of these people.
Yeah, talk about the Flat Earth Society. You know, that's how I think a lot of scientists, because they don't want to touch it. That's their behavior, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, some of these, you put in the copies of the emails you sent out and were sent back, and it was very frustrating because you were making points over and over again, and their rebuttals were absolutely not even addressing the your points. Your points weren't addressed.
No, not at all. Evading it totally. It's a process of denial. You know, you can be skeptical. I don't object to that. But a lot of scientists here are in denial mode. They won't even consider it. You know, as far as they're concerned, UFOs don't exist, full stop. And therefore, if anyone presents any evidence that perhaps suggests that they exist, it can be ignored. It's a totally unscientific attitude. It astonishes me that scientists can have that kind of mindset. Quite honestly, I don't know why it is. I think possibly. And I was talking about this to somebody else the other day. I think they're frightened of it. I think they're frightened of this subject. The SETI people are all very, very happy to talk about ET as long as they're out there, far ends of the universe or far ends of the galaxy, and they're not going to affect us. But once you start trying to broach the subject of, well, maybe they're already here, they don't want to know. The only reason it's a profoundly irrational mindset, and the only reason I can think about it, that I could try to reason for it, is that they're frightened of this. They don't want to know about it.
That's probably really true.
I don't know if that's true, but I can't explain it any other way. Honestly.
It certainly makes sense, and I was pretty happy to see that my podcast was actually in your book. And that was, you listened to when I debated Dr. Seth Shostak on UFOs. That's right. And so I want you to talk about the email correspondence you had with Dr. Shostak when you said, and I believe his quote was something in my podcast, something like, "Show me the evidence" type of thing. And you said, "Okay, well, here's the evidence." Can you kind of go how that whole thing played out?
Well, I heard his desire to be shown evidence, so I sent him some evidence. I said, "Well, what do you think of this?" And basically, he thought it was interesting. but that was it. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be drawn any other way. I mean, even recently, or fairly recently, I communicated with him again about this, and he basically said all he sees is that there's a ring in the ground. Never mind about what's in the ring or what the background to the ring is. He sees a ring in the ground, and therefore, because he knows that UFOs can't exist, it's got to be something else. Anything else, but not UFOs. And that's it. He will not accept that anything like this might actually be occurring. So, it's total denial. It's not skepticism, it's total denial. At least with skepticism, you can try and rationalize your way out of something. I was hoping, I said to him, well, look, we got this chemical in the ring, it's unstable, it oxidizes in air. How has it got there? Who put it there? Why is the ring elongated toward the wind direction and either? He doesn't give a reason. He just said, look, this is there's any number of things. He said any number of things could have made that ring. Not going into any detail. Unbelievable. That's not science. That's just denial. And I can't argue with anyone like that because it's not a rational argument.
You think that the scientists generally have a curiosity. That's why they're scientists. They
do, absolutely they do. I'm amazed that they're not more curious about this. But as I say, there is a profoundly irrational aspect to this, and all I can put it down to is fear. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. They don't want to consider the fact that ET may already be here. That's the only reason I can offer. They won't even consider it. End of. It doesn't exist. Therefore, whatever you propose, whatever you give me as evidence, I'm not even going to bother to look at it. How can you have a rational discussion about UFOs when when people have this kind of mindset? Unbelievable.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Well, you look at like you said, there's a difference between skeptics and debunkers and all that, but they're saying, well, it used to be fairies and it used to be this and that, and now it's UFOs. That it's just like pop culture, and that's where a lot of people are putting this. As pop culture has nothing to do with reality, that type of thing. And it's preconceived. It's a preconceived notion. They haven't looked into it properly. They're making an analogy which isn't a correct one. Well, it's kind of like where the cat's whiskers now. We should know everything, and I should know everything, so I would know that if it was happening, type of thing. That whole type of analogy.
But that's Seth Shostak told me, look, if there was anything to this subject, we would know about it. Well, excuse me, you're not giving it a chance. Go out and have a look, and they don't want to look. So if they don't want to look, what do you do about it?
Basically, when it comes to
it's very frustrating.
When it comes to SETI and that whole entire program, they would basically be washed up totally if all of a sudden there was 100% evidence that, UFOs were visiting here and there was intelligent life visiting us. They would be closing the doors. That's basically what would happen to them. So he has a vested interest in opposing the idea of UFOs.
Well, okay, he may have that, but that doesn't deter other scientists who are not involved with SETI not to take it up. I mean, it's an across the board thing. Most scientists will not touch this subject because, for one thing, there's peer pressure as well. They don't want to do something where, because they find that they're going to get insults from their peers, for example. So it needs somebody strong-willed enough and courageous enough to start the ball rolling, and nobody seems to be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to go a little off topic because, just out of my own curiosity, the subject of abductions comes up quite a bit, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Abductions, I have an interest in abductions. I think it's part and parcel of the UFO phenomenon. I mean, if UFOs are, as we believe, ET coming here and showing themselves, albeit in a pretty secretive way, mostly. It stands to reason that these things have got to have pilots. Mm-hmm. So, the notion that people report seeing UFO aliens isn't altogether surprising to me. Now, you then get the further stories of alien abductions. Well, it's not one, it's not two, it's several. And they, again, like the UFO phenomenon itself, they do seem to have consistencies. Mm-hmm. So I'm open-minded as far as abductions are concerned, but it is just a part of the story that really we shouldn't be delving too much into, because the emphasis needs to be we need to get evidence that the UFOs themselves exist. And once we get that evidence, then we can start to think about abductions. But I'm open-minded as far as abductions are concerned. It doesn't totally surprise me that if ET is here in the shape of UFOs, that there are going to be pilots of the UFOs who might then, at certain times, encroach with society in the way that abductions appear to be reported.
I also, in the beginning when I first started doing the show, I had a sighting first back in 2006, and then when I started doing this show, I was really on the fence about abductions, and then I started to really kind of think along the lines of what you're saying, and that is, they're obviously here, and why wouldn't they be, checking us out like we would if we went to, of course you can't always think that they're thinking like we are, but still, if you're going to make the bother to go however far it is or however long it took to get here to explore, then of course you're going to explore species, I would imagine. I can't imagine it would be a wasted trip to just look at the scenery and go away.
Absolutely. So for those sorts of reasons, I don't see that there's a big problem about people reporting UFO pilots, and of course that they sometimes might want to stop by and maybe find out how humans tick. I don't know. As I say, it's something I'm open-minded to. I don't see that it's logically that it's such a problem here. I really don't. Right.
All right, so that's it for today. I want to thank you very much, Errol. This was really fascinating.
My pleasure, Martin. It's good to be able to talk about the Delphos case. I think it is a really interesting case, and for the life of me, I don't really see how anyone can explain it other than it being a genuine case. But, it's out there for scientists to ponder if they should wish.
Yes, and you can find it on Amazon. And remember, the title to the book is The Compelling Scientific Evidence for UFOs, the Analysis of the Delphos, Kansas UFO Landing Report. And on Amazon, you can buy the book, paperback, or you can actually get it on Kindle. And hang in there for a minute. We'll be right back with Clas Svahn. All right, I'm on the line with Clas Svahn from Sweden, and Claes was on, back in 2013. Most of you that are listening have not heard him before. I really like the way the UFO subject is approached over there, and they have an amazing library. We're going to be talking about all that. Welcome to the show, Claes.
Thank you, Martin. Good to be with you again.
Yes, and can you basically tell us your background and your position with UFO-Sweden?
Yes, I am Vice Chairman of UFO-Sweden and also a Director for International Contacts. I was Chairman for UFO-Sweden for nearly 25 years. So I have been interested in UFOs for most of my life. I started as a very young guy in the early 1970s, and so UFOs has been with me since I think 1971 and 1974 I started UFO Group. But besides that, I'm a journalist at Dagens Nyheter, which is the largest morning newspaper in Sweden, and a very good newspaper. So I'm employed by them and work 100% as a journalist.
I see. And this UFO-Sweden, how much of your time does that take?
I put in 2 or 3 hours a day, every day.
And is it like a national UFO reporting center for, like, we have like MUFON here and a few others?
Yeah, they are quite similar, really. We started in 1970, and the idea with UFO-Sweden at that time, as it is now, was to connect people interested in UFOs and smaller organizations around Sweden, like an umbrella organization. And that's the way we work today as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there anything going on prior to you starting this starting this group back in 1974? Well,
quite early on, I think I was 10 or 11 years of age, I was very much interested in astronomy. I bought a telescope and I spent hours and hours out in the dark looking at the stars, reading every book I could get my hands on, really. So that was the start. And after a couple of years, I also started reading about UFOs. There were quite a lot of good books about UFOs in Swedish at that time.
Uh-huh.
So
no, I meant what I really meant by that question. Was there a organization going on before 1974 in Sweden?
Not in that capacity. It was smaller organizations, and UFO-Sweden wanted to connect them under this umbrella. The first one started in the 1950s, but they were not very large. They were in cities around Sweden, and this was the first national organization.
Uh-huh. And back in, I want to say it was 1946, what did they call them? Not airships. What did they call them?
The ghost rockets.
Ghost rockets, that's right. Let's talk, I know we talked about that last time, but I really want to have the new listener here about that whole thing that was going on, because I remember they were landing, a lot of them were landing in lakes.
Yeah, the ghost rockets are very, very strange. I mean, it's the strangest, I think, UFO phenomena of them all. I started my interest with them quite early on, and in 1986, me and a friend at the archives for UFO research, as it was called at that time, found the military files. Because in 1946, the military founded a ghost rocket committee. They were looking into observations of rocket-like, cigar-shaped, elongated objects with or without wings flying over Sweden. And they investigated around 1,000 observations in 6 months. Most of them were just lights in the sky, but a couple of hundred of them were objects, physical objects. And as you said, around 100 of them crashed into lakes around Sweden. And the military put quite a lot of effort into trying to find them, but they didn't. All they found was indentations in the seafloor, rocks rocks thrown up on land from the crash, and witnesses describing huge columns of water thrown up in the air when this object crashed down in front of them.
Now, what would be the difference between a ghost rocket and a dirigible? You know, like a...
Yeah. There are really no similarities at all, because dirigible is flying smoothly in the air. Those ones were flying like aircraft, very fast. And when they crashed, they could hear a terrific sound coming from them, more like the V-bombs during the Second World War. So many people thought that this was something that the Russians had captured from the Nazi Germany after the war, and they were now shooting them over Sweden and Finland and the north of Norway. But as we have found out later, it wasn't the case. Russia wasn't shooting any rockets like that. And those rockets, the ghost rockets, they were flying over much longer distances than the V-bombs ever could fly.
So, excuse me, would the observer see these fly like an arc, like they were actually heading down to crash, or would they just see them fly overhead? And some people would occasionally see and hear a crash.
Both of them, really. Many people just saw them flying over. But people living around the lakes where the crashes occurred, they did see them coming down straight out the sky from right above their heads. In one case, a Swedish military pilot encountered one of those rockets in air, and he followed the rocket, but he was outflown by it. So it flew away into a storm cloud that this pilot had avoided because he was scared of flying into that because of the lightning. But the rocket did fly there anyway.
Now, as far as the crashing, there was never any explosion or anything that you know of?
Well, in one case, there was a reported explosion. First, they saw the rocket coming down and a splash, and after just a second after that, it was an explosion, and a second column of water was thrown up. But most of the times, it was just a crash. But at that occasion, the military found this indentation in the seafloor, so they could see that something had exploded there.
Wow. So nothing has ever been resolved from this. This is just still an ongoing mystery. Is there anyone actively trying to research at this point what that was?
Well, it's still an ongoing phenomenon as well, because those rockets are still sighted from now and then over Sweden. And right now, UFO-Sweden, we have, since 3 years ago now, started an investigation of a site up in the very, very north of Sweden, where two people in broad daylight in 1980 were standing at the very shore of a lake in a national park, and they heard a sound from the heavens, and they saw this rocket flying under 100 yards above them, over them, going down and turning around 180 degrees, coming back and landing on the lake and sinking. So they reported that to the military, and the military sent a helicopter there and tried to look for it, but they didn't find anything because they were just looking from the sky, and the rocket was probably in the mud that time. But we have been there now looking for that rocket, and the last time we went there, we got radar returns that are very promising. So we will go back there now in November on the ice with snow scooters, with the special equipment, trying to get a 3D picture of this radar return.
Now, what about scuba diving?
Yeah, we have had divers. Two policemen from Kiruna have helped us dive there. But the problem is that it's 4 meters of mud. So this rocket, or whatever it was, is somewhere in that mud. Oh,
my. Now I understand why you have to use that type of imaging. Wow. Yeah, that's like 12 feet of mud, something like that. Amazing, amazing. Okay, now, one of the questions I thought about asking you was, in the U.S. in particular, there's a lot of triangular UFO sightings going on currently, and I just wanted to hear your feedback over there in Sweden, if you're hearing anything about these triangles.
Yes, we do. We have had triangular observations for 30 or 35 years at least. Not very many. But just a couple of weeks ago, UFO-Sweden had a project 150 kilometers south of Stockholm where we randomly knocked doors and tried to interview people if they had seen anything strange in the heavens. And at least one of them had seen a black triangle quite low in the sky a couple of years ago. So we are still getting observations like that, but they are not very common at all.
Wow. So what would you consider the most common sighting you get? Is it the typical lights in the sky?
I mean, 90% of all the sightings we are getting, and we are getting at least one sighting every day or every second day, are nighttime observations of lights in the sky. This research we did a couple of weeks ago south of Stockholm, it turned out that 1 out of every 10 people had seen something that they have never reported to anyone, really. And that's the same figures we have been getting in other parts of Sweden. So now we have interviewed 1,700 Swedes, and around nearly 200 of them had seen something in the sky that you should call a UFO.
Now, one of the things I was very impressed with last time we spoke, and I want to talk about it a little bit, is how Sweden takes the topic without ridicule. You never have to worry about getting ridiculed for... you actually appear on television quite a bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that and why you wonder why that's not that way. Is it just because it's treated scientifically?
I think so. I think it's because UFO-Sweden never says that we have the answer. We are looking for the answer. We are looking into an unknown phenomena, several phenomena, unknown phenomena. And we are sure about that. There are things in the sky that are not easily explained. But we are not labeling them. We are just trying to look into this mystery. And I think that is the key to being treated in a way that is serious and positive. When we started out this exploration south of Stockholm now a couple of weeks ago, the week before we went there, I went to all the newspapers, radio stations, TV stations, and gave interviews that we were coming. So everyone we knocked the door for knew that UFO-Sweden were coming. And after that, there was lots of articles published about this as well. And not a single article was bad publicity or it was good. It was a very, very... they treated us really as scientists more than anything else.
Uh-huh. And so you actually just plain knocked the doors and interviewed people. And were there people reluctant to talk about?
No, not really, because they knew that we were coming. Mm-hmm. They read about us, they heard about us, and they had a week to think about things that they would like to tell us. It's only a couple of people over the years that had just slammed the doors in our face. Mm-hmm. Most of them are curious. If they haven't seen anything, they are curious about us.
I see. Now, during those interviews, was there any situation where there was a collaboration of witnesses that the same people saw the same object?
Yeah, we did find a couple of persons that had seen an object over a small lake that we knew of before. We had 3 different witnesses from that same observation before, And since it was a very interesting observation where 3 fishermen were standing out in the night trying to catch fish in a lake, they experienced this silenceness and the wind stopped blowing, and suddenly an object, a very large sphere of light, different colors, came out of the sky and stayed over them and performed some maneuvers for a couple of minutes, leaving. And after that, the rain started again, and the wind started again, and the sound started again. That sighting, it looks like we have another or a couple of other witnesses at another end of the lake now from this investigation.
Wow, that's amazing. That's I think that's the first sighting I've ever heard about the elements like rain and wind and stuff like that being affected. Have you ever heard of a similar case?
Yeah, there are similar cases. It's called the Oz factor. So Jen Randalls labeled it as the Oz factor once, because the Wizard of Oz is like coming to another world. Mm-hmm. And we do have observations like that in Sweden, and there are also in other countries. They are not very common, but what people experience are that something is fundamentally altered around them. So it may be the Oz factor in this case.
You know, it's I'm sure that it could possibly be happening in other sightings, but it may be something that people that's like secondary. In other words, you know, the first thing they see is the object. They're baffled by it, and so they're not really paying attention to what's happening around them. Say if the wind dies down or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. You could be right there. They could be focused on the object and just forget about the other stuff.
Right. Now, I remembered also that you have an amazing library there and people come from all over the world to do some research. One of the things I thought about since I spoke to you last time, what is your earliest book that you're aware of, you know, as far as the date goes?
We do have a couple of books from the 1800s, original books with UFO observations. But we have a lot of PDF documents from libraries around the world from the 1600s and 1700s as well. And there, of course, are older observations. But to get our hands on that kind of books are quite expensive. So most of them are from the 1800s that we have been able to get. But the library is fantastic, and I'm going to Great Britain on Friday to assemble more books as well. So I will bring back at least 4,000 new books to the library this time.
Wow. How many books do you think you have in total?
The library is around 30,000 volumes. And it's 2.2 kilometers of shelves, which is 2,400 yards of bookshelves. And that is, of course, not only books, that's UFO reports, it's magazines, everything. So this archives was called Archives for UFO Research. Now it's a new name. It's called Archives for the Unexplained, because we have expanded so much into the other spheres of the unknown. So we have changed the name. But it's 500 square meters, 600 square yards altogether. And around 20 people are working there during a week.
Amazing. Now, who funds? Are these all volunteers, or is this funded?
Well, it's funded in a way. We are 50 people putting money from our own pockets there every month. But we have also an unemployment scheme together with the unemployment agency. So we do employ people for scanning and digitizing, and we are getting some money from the government to do that. So that is an income as well. That kind of money has helped us now to buy computers and scanners and lots of stuff. So we are a little more high-tech now than, say, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this like it sounds like it has to be a fairly large building.
It's several buildings because we don't have the money to rent one premises. So we are renting 11 on the same street. That's the only way we can afford it. And we are expanding all the time, so we have to rent another one and get another one. And just a year ago, we got a fantastic archive from Spain. It was an old UFO group, 50 years of age, that folded, and they sent their entire archives to us.
Wow.
And I will now go to Denmark to get 500 or 600 books from Denmark. I will go to Belgium to bring back a couple of thousand books from Belgium, and also now to Britain. So I'm trying to save files and books wherever I can find them, really.
Now, you're saying that you're doing some digitizing too. Is this, are there actually English versions? Is that part of the archives?
Most of this is not Swedish. I mean, it's an international archives. I would say then 70% of all the material are English. We have a lot of Russian, we have German, and, well, any other language really, but English is the most common language within the archives. And if you go to afu.se, which is the domain we have, you will find lists of many of the things we keep there. But in a couple of days, we will meet with a couple of Americans that may be interested in sponsoring more digitizing. So I hope that next year we will be publishing lots of the fantastic material we do have at AFU for anyone to access.
Now, let's just say that someone is doing some research. Let's just say an author, or let's just throw Nick Redfern or someone like that. He's doing some research on a certain topic, and he wants to come over and research in the library there. Do you have these things like separated into topics, or how do you handle something like that?
Some of the files we have are, say, from Flying Saucer Review. We are keeping their archives together as a separate item. But when we are digitizing, you are going to be able to find stuff from any of the archives we have assembled during the years. I mean, we have the research files from Contact International, British UFO Research Organization, Flying Saucer Review, from Russia, Scandinavia, and lots of countries. And all of those are, of course, in different languages, most in English. But they will be searchable in English. That's the thing we are working very, very hard to achieve right now. We had a researcher from Penn State University sitting for a week this summer, writing a thesis about UFOs. And,
really?
And that was his second visit to Sweden. He went there last year as well because he found us so good that he didn't have to travel any other place. He just came to us and everything was there.
Wow, that's amazing. When someone is actually looking to donate items, do they just contact you through your website?
Yes, you can do that. Many people are finding us that way, afu.se. But most of the time, it's because I'm calling them. And I've been calling people for 25 or 30 years.
Wow.
Emailing, meeting with them. So every time I go to Britain, I meet new people and old people. And they can help me with finding other archives that may be in danger. They may know about someone who has his attic full of magazines that I should take a look at, and so on and so on. So it's really different ways they find us.
I see. Now, we have a past guest that was on here that actually found, through means of looking on the Internet, he found archives and boxes of documents and pictures and everything from Project Blue Book. And he is is digitizing that, working on that. Is that some type of material that you'd be interested in, that type of thing, and preserving? Something like that?
Exactly that kind of thing we are interested in preserving, because we are preserving the paperworks as well. I mean, many people are digitizing now around the world, but they don't have the place for the paperworks. But we do have that, and what we have now is the microfilm rolls from Project Blue Book. Ah. We have, but we don't have the paperworks, and we are always interested in things like that.
This was probably a very, very small collection, but still, it's still quite a bit. It came from someone that was working with them that obviously retired, right after and left. He was there right when it closed, so I think he just gathered some papers, perhaps what he was working on a little bit more at that time. And they ended up going in a yard sale.
Wow. Yeah, he did a fantastic thing saving that. I mean, I'm very glad to hear that it's saved, and I would very much like to get in contact with him at some point.
I'm going to, I just made a note as we're talking here to connect you two together. And we really don't have anything like that. There's the Roswell Museum and places like that, but there's some other correspondence between, really interesting researchers, people involved, things like that. I think really I'm sort of into history and it's my business as far as regular historical documents and research and stuff like that. So I really like to see these things preserved for all time because they will mean something, as you go along, whatever happens.
If you don't have any history, you don't have any future. I mean, it's really like that. You must know what happened, what other researchers did before you. So, and to make that available, I mean, we do not want things just to be put on shelves. We want to make it available so people can use it. That's the main thing for us.
Right. And the one thing that is always a concern is the condition, keeping things in good condition. So I imagine you have to do some climate control in these buildings and all kinds of extra work to get to preserve these things properly.
Yes, it's a lot of work. We work with acid-free boxes, and well, we know how to preserve things, and we do have a proper librarian working for us. When she retired a couple of years ago from her library in Norrköping, she came to us and said, "I can work for you for free."
Oh, wow!
So she's helping us to cataloging books. But the poor soul is always a couple of thousand books behind.
I'm sure. So let's change gears a little bit here and talk about what is happening. You said you get about 1 to 2 calls. Is it every day or so?
Yeah, it's at least one a day, and it's around 300 and 400 observations every year here in Sweden.
Uh-huh. And do you have people that actually go out into the field, like, say, for instance, there's boots on the ground, MUFON investigators, people like that? Do you have that going on?
Yeah, since 40 years back, we have had field investigating trainee course for every year. And we are educating at least 35 field investigators every year. So we do have people all around Sweden helping out, going to the more interesting observations, of course, not the lights in the skies, but when something is more interesting, we are sending people there.
All right. Can you talk about any of the recent cases? Anything come to mind that's really interesting?
Yes, I mean, we got so many very interesting cases now from this project south of Stockholm. So some of them broad daylight observations. And I gave a lecture yesterday in a city outside Stockholm, and a lady came to me and said, I saw one of those cigars with the huge windows with lots of lights coming out from them. It was flying silently in the sky. It was still light. It was not dark. And I saw it for maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Things like that coming up when you're out talking. You're meeting people as well. And many of them have stories you never heard before.
That's right. I find that to be true as well as when you talk to the general public. And more in the United States, it's a little tricky because there's a lot of ridicule when it comes to talking about UFOs, and there's a lot of attitudes about that. But when I get comfortable with someone, a lot of times I'll tell them about this show that I do, and it seems like 3 out of 4 times someone will have a story themselves, or they'll know someone that saw something. So I think there's a lot of stories that are untold, basically, out there.
I mean, if 1 out of 10 has a story, it's our experience now shows us, and we are 10 million people in Sweden, there are 1 million UFO stories not told yet. And we have around 20,000 sightings in our Swedish archives. So there are so many stories out there that we have never heard.
Well, it's funny. The story you just mentioned, I have talked about way back on this show, maybe a couple of years ago. But my girlfriend's father, I'm going to Russia, and while this show is playing, I'll actually be in Russia. But he was driving through a mountain pass, and all of a sudden his car stopped, and he pulled over to the side, and he noticed everyone was pulled over to the side, and people were out lifting their hoods of their car, looking at their engines, wondering what was going on. And all of a sudden, without a noise, this long cigar-shaped craft with portholes, he said it had portholes like windows, floated through the mountain pass without a sound, and everybody was just staring up at it, and all of the thing just floated through, and someone got back in their car and tried the car, and all the cars started back up, and they all drove away without even talking to each other.
Is that a recent observation or an old one?
That was an old one.
Most of them are from the 1970s.
Yeah, that could be from at that point.
Lots of the cigar-shaped objects with the very bright lights in the windows or portholes are from the 1970s. They are not very common anymore. And why? I don't know. That is a strange thing.
Well, it's like the ghost rockets. It's like discs were very common and not so common as much anymore. That's what I saw, actually. But I kind of joke about it. There's like new UFO models coming out this year.
Yeah.
It really is strange, and it really makes you wonder. A lot of times I've said on the show, and I like what you said earlier, is that you don't try to explain what it is. You don't try to say, it's aliens or time travelers or whatever. You just say you don't know. And I also have said on the show in the past, the whole thing could be something that we haven't even or couldn't even think of.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be preposterous of us to think that we should know the answers now. I mean, we are just in the beginning of investigating this. I mean, we have only been into this for 40 or 50 years, which is a very, very small amount of time, really short amount of time. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of things coming up. So, right. I think we should be careful before deciding. And,
getting back to the earlier time, we were talking about historical sightings, and I don't have the facts on this, but, I think it was there's a story about Alexander the Great having 2 sightings and in great detail, but nobody can seem to research it past, I think it's like 1959 when someone wrote it in a book. There's no other earlier accounts. And so there are a lot of times in this field where myth or stories seem to become facts, because now I've seen that on 2 or 3 documentaries where they're talking about Alexander the Great having these sightings.
Yeah. I think that is a story that has been debunked enough now, and it really didn't happen at all in that way. The group I am working together with on the internet, with Chris Aubeck as one of the main drivers behind it, have looked into that, and I don't take it seriously at all. But as you say, the stories are living, and the people have heard about them, mm-hmm. and they are not interested in the new solutions that may come down the road, because they knew what they heard once. And that's the way with us people. We work like that. What we learned in school 40 years ago is still fact for us, in spite of lots of things have happened in between. We have so hard to learn new things.
Right. And it's really hard for some people to let go of, for instance, if new evidence comes up that an object or a sighting was something explainable, sometimes people don't want to know. They don't want to know about that, especially if they've written a book.
Yeah, especially then. I mean, some people are doing this for the money. Some people are doing this for the curiosity. And the moneymakers, of course, they want to defend the stories. They are doing everything they can to defend the story and the people who told the story. They are not interested in turning the stones, looking what's underneath them, and they are not interested in new facts. But God bless us, there are a lot of good UFO investigators out there as well that do not have an agenda, but they just want to know what's behind the mystery.
Right. Now, one of the things I do remember, I was interested in speaking to you last time and like to follow up with you on this, and that is, I remember you saying that there's very few accounts of any type of abductions.
Yes, that is strange, but Sweden and I should say the Scandinavian countries do not have many at all. They do have them, but quite few. I think it may depend on that the Scandinavian UFO organizations have never used hypnosis. Well, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times, but they don't really trust hypnosis. So the stories that they have been told have only been from people who have seen things in awakened condition. They have not met people in their bedrooms and in a condition between awakening and sleep, which is a problem.
Right. I do remember there was one, I believe it was a former police officer and his wife. I'm hoping you'll tell that story again because that was, are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a police officer, but it was him and his wife in the bed in 1991. They were sleeping in their house in the south of Sweden. And he wrote a letter to me after reading one of my books, asking me to come there to meet them. So I went there, and he didn't tell his wife that I was coming, so she was quite reluctant from the beginning. But after a couple of hours, we were sitting in their living room, and she also told me the story. And she told me that when I'm getting to bed and to sleep at night, I usually wake up exactly the same way. I'm a good sleeper. I don't fancy around in bed doing stuff, but sleep sound and well. But this night, she said, I woke up and I was facing down, floating over the bed, maybe just 4 or 5 centimeters. And she was frightened, of course. And the room was illuminated by a greenish light. And she could feel that she was dragged out of the bed towards a window. She couldn't see what was behind her, but she could feel this. She was very frightened, so she tried to wake up her husband, but she couldn't. She couldn't scream. So she grabbed him at his arm. And the husband told me that he woke up from this grab and saw his wife floating out of the bed towards 3 entities standing behind her. And from them there was some sort of light coming out. They were those bodiless, Whitty Strieber aliens, really. And he thought, what should I do? So he tried to kick them. And when he did that, they were just vanishing. The light blanked out. It was completely dark in the room again. And his wife, he could hear his wife falling to the floor because at that time she had floated out of the bed. So she fell to the floor. And after that, she climbed up in the bed and they said to each other, what was that? And they fell asleep again, which is more strange than the story in itself. Really.
Well, not really. It seems like I've heard that a lot. for instance, there's a famous case over here called the Allagash abductions, and there was 4 people, and they were actually right after the whole incident. They all just they couldn't believe it, but they all just fell asleep.
Yeah.
And maybe there was a missing time. It's hard to say, in a story like that. But you felt pretty comfortable that they were at least believing what they were telling you?
Yes, I do. And I have continued to investigate this story because this man and wife, they separated a couple of years ago. So I called them again when they were living with new families. And they had nothing really to help out the other guy with, so they didn't have any cover stories for the other one anymore, if they had one. Mm-hmm. And they were telling the same story again, and they were still puzzled by this more than 20 years afterwards. So something happened there. And they said to me, if there had been some burglars standing there in the middle of the night, we had been on our feet immediately. We had called the police, we'd been running around. Mm-hmm. But suddenly we just talked to each other very shortly, and then we fell asleep again. Mm-hmm. So to them, it's still a mystery. And for me, I think they really experienced this.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Now, one of the topics I know we've never really talked about, and except for the ghost ships, are there any known crashed UFOs in Sweden?
Not really. There have been reports. We have been looking into them, but never found anything. I think the ghost rockets are the only one really crashing down. People have found stuff that we have looked into, and we have been able to identify everything this far. Mm-hmm. So, no, not really. What we do have are a couple of very interesting military observations that we have been looking into, and fighter pilots seeing things in the sky. That is, to me, interesting because they saw it on radar as well.
Yeah. Do you have any good stories?
Yeah, it's especially one. And that shows as well that people are not reporting things until years and years afterwards. Because in 1999, we got an email from a fighter pilot called Sven Hjalmarsson. And he did experience this in 1977. But it was so strange that he didn't report it at that time, even to the military, because he was out on a training flight outside the east coast in the Baltic area of Sweden. And he got a report from the radar on the ground that some unidentified object were coming from east, entering Swedish airspace. And he was called to get out there to identify it. So he took his fighter craft and headed for it. And after a while, he could see it on his radar as well. So it was seen both on the radar on ground and on the radar on board his fighter craft. At that time, the object was hovering on around 1,000 yards over the sea level. But after just a couple of, maybe half a minute, the object seemed to discover the pilot, because from being stationary, hovering, it started to climb straight up. And he started to fly after it. And he told me that he was flying as much as this aircraft could do, and it was one of the very nicest aircraft at that time. Was a Dragon J-35, very, very good aircraft. He was trying to catch it, but he was outflown. He could see the object flying, as he told me, right out into space, and then he lost it.
Wow. Now, there's a part of Sweden that is a coastline, and are there people ever talking about what we call over here in the United States USOs?
I mean, Sweden has thousands and thousands of observations of what could be, what they always think are Russian submarines, I mean, USOs. We have a long, long history with people seeing things in the water. Some of the times, it is Russia, but many, many times it's something else or nothing at all, of course. But around Stockholm, the Stockholm area, there are thousands of people that have seen things out in the waters. It's hard to investigate them. It's even harder than investigate things over land. But the reports are there, and people are believing that there are things out there that they don't understand.
Uh-huh. Now, what is the hoaxing like in Sweden? Is there any of that going on?
Not very much, really. Some pictures, because it's easy to do them, and they look fantastic when they send them to us. Mostly young boys doing that. But I would say maybe 4 or 5 hoaxes every year. Nothing more like that.
Wow. We probably have that per day here.
Okay.
Well, YouTube. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube that's not right, and and unfortunately because there's some great videos on YouTube as well. So it's almost like it needs to be monitored. There was a past guest, a girl that was calling out a lot of them. I haven't seen her as active as she was, but it would be nice to separate the real somehow from people that are hoaxing, and it's not going to get any easier to spot the hoaxes as technology gets better. CGI, you can create anything with CGI.
It's very hard to be a UFO investigator these days because, as you say, there are so many different ways to hoax, and they are getting better all the time. I look at YouTube as entertainment and maybe sometimes as raw material for something to ponder. But it's not, it's not the answer. If you are lucky, you can find a video where the name of the photographer and the date, the time of day, and the place are stated.
Right.
But most of them have neither, or maybe just one of them. So as long as you cannot get in touch with the photographer, to make a proper investigation, it's just entertainment. Yeah.
That's the visual is a secondary. The witnesses, the most important, right?
Yeah, always. If you're going to investigate a picture or a film, the man or woman behind the camera are always the most important.
So when let's just say you have a call come in. And what are the steps that you take to trying to weed out, what is explainable and not? Do they actually fill out a form?
Yes. Many of the reports are coming in through our website, ufo.se, through a form from the beginning. So we do have an electronic form there. We also have a paper form we can send out. Most of the people are not sending paperwork back because it's very you must put a stamp on an envelope, and that's hard work.
It's the same thing over here. I had Peter Davenport was on a month or so ago and saying that it's a very small percentage of people that actually go through the effort of filling out the forms. Yeah,
Peter would know. He's been around as long as I have been, and it's like that. So we are going there instead, bringing the form, sitting down with the guy or the girl, and filling it out. Wow. If it's an important observation, not the specks of light in the sky, of course. Then we are, of course, checking with what's up in the sky at the time. Is it any bright stars or planets? We do have scientists on our board that are looking into the most prominent cases that we think need evaluation. We have meteorologists, we have physicists, we have witness psychologists, and so on and so on. And they look through our investigation, telling us what we could do better, what they think about it, and so on, to improve ourselves and to get a second opinion. We also work quite closely with the military, and a couple of years ago, the military, at my request, scanned all of their archives. They put one man for 3.5 months scanning, and then they gave me everything on a 2 terabyte hard drive.
Wow. Well, that is really wonderful. It reminds me of, Chile is they have the connection through their government and through the military, and all arms of the government are actually helping out. Police departments, you name it, everything. And it sounds like you have something very similar going on there.
Yeah, people are calling the police in Sweden. Many of them are turning the calls to us. And same with our spaceport S-range in the north of Sweden. When they get reports, they are referring them to us. And the military are also referring people to us. So we do have a very good cooperation in that way.
Now, we're just about out of time here, and I just wanted to ask one more question of you. Are there any hot spots where the people are seeing sightings more often than anywhere else in Sweden?
Yeah, that was what we were looking into when we did this research project a couple of weeks ago south of Stockholm. We thought it was a hotspot there, a UFO window, because we had so many observations from that area. But after looking into this and knocking the doors and talking to people, we did see it was the same ratio, 1 to 10, as in the other part of Sweden. So it was just that we had UFO groups working there during the 1970s and 80s, and they were out doing the field work in such a good way that they found a lot of observations. So we thought it was a sign for a UFO window, but it wasn't. No, it's no places like hotspots here. We have tried to see that, but no.
So we're getting at toward the end of the interview. Is there any message you'd like to get out there?
I think international cooperation is very important, and the means for that, I mean, Facebook, email, websites, are at hand, so we can really work together, ufologists all around the world. And we do that from a couple of years ago. We started this cooperation. I think that is more and more important, because this is a worldwide phenomena, and the answer couldn't be found in just one country. This is something we need to learn to work together with, and to get over the language barriers and so. And I would recommend everyone interested in the ghost rockets to look at our Facebook page, Ghost Rockets, because there you can find in November a link to a new web page with all the Swedish documents translated into English, with all the government files from Ghost Rockets work during 1946. And that will be published in November.
Wow, that's wonderful. And actually translated. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Claes.
Thank you, Martin. Nice to be with you again.
So I want to thank a few people for helping out with the show. Keith Rowland for managing the live part of the network. Peggy Shunny for managing the Facebook page. Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music. Alejandro will be back after I'm back from vacation. Next week, Michael Lauk will be hosting with guest William Grabowski. Remember, everyone, keep your eyes to the sky.